Welcome back to another edition of Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star.
Sam King, Journal and Courier.
That was a fierce declaration. We are in the Mackey Arena media room.
We're out of touch because we haven't done one of these enough.
We are. We're a little not in mid-season form on our pod and video feed here, but we are from the Mackey Arena media room. This is Monday before Purdue heads off to Iowa. I believe they are en route to the airport soon, if not already there, heading to Iowa City. We will both be there on Tuesday, and it's the first Purdue game of February, so that's kind of like a marker in the schedule of kind of getting into crunch time, right? Like you're getting into the final. You've passed over the midway point pretty definitively of Big Ten. Of the midpoint of the Big Ten schedule. And now it's what goals are in front of you and what can you still accomplish. And for Purdue, the one that was the biggest goal from the beginning of the season to win a third straight conference championship is still very much in play. And we did a podcast at one point where we were both kind of like, I don't know if that's going to happen. And then they just took off. And we won't take credit. You know, it's not like we didn't cause it, but in fact, it's probably the opposite. This winning 8 of 9 and putting themselves back in position, it changes what conversations would be going on right now. If you lose even 1 or 2 games in that stretch, then there's more of a gap. They're only a half game back of Michigan State now that Michigan finally lost a game. They're half game ahead of Michigan, who they already have a win over this season. They're in a comfortable place. They're not in first. They've been in first for their first game of February each of the last 2 years, but they're right there in a position to where they somewhat control their own destiny, especially since they do play Michigan State head-to-head here in a couple of weeks.
And Michigan State finally losing the game kind of opened the door again, because I think until you lose a game, you're in the league, you're a contender for a conference championship. And it just, and I know Michigan State had a very favorable front half schedule. So did Purdue to a large degree. But, you think that the loss to Ohio State at home, where you're leading by significant margin early in that game, felt like one that slipped away and maybe cost you a conference title opportunity, and that ended up kind of now not being the case. I think Purdue's response to that has been huge, to go out and thump Michigan on the backs of that game the way that it did, and then felt like Indiana game was going to be a pivotal game, because Indiana is, as I've said before on here, a very talented team that could disrupt the Big Ten championship for somebody, even if it wasn't a contender itself, and that almost became the case at Purdue's expense. But to get a win there was huge, and now you're in a situation where Iowa, on the road, looks like a game that you should win, especially with Owen Freeman now being out for the year, probably Iowa's best player. And then you got USC at home, and then you start picking up the big ones here in the latter stages of the Big Ten season.
I think you could argue, we'll come back to the Owen Freeman point in a moment, because that is a huge piece of Tuesday's game. But you could argue that the teams that there's two different West Coast stretches you could get, right? You get the one that Purdue got, the Washington, Oregon one, and then you get the USC, UCLA one. And we talked before the season about how this championship was probably going to be decided as much by the schedule and who you get to play and who you don't have to play and where you have to play them more than ever before. That was going to be a factor for this now 18-team league. And the way USC has come along, including beating Michigan State finally, I think you could argue pretty strongly that the teams that you would rather have Purdue's side of it than the other side of it, because I think USC has come along and made itself more of a mid-tier Big Ten team, and then UCLA and Oregon are kind of similar tiered, and Washington's very much down at the bottom. And that's maybe one little break that Purdue has caught in this. Michigan State definitely had an easier front half of the schedule. I would say even easier than Purdue's was, but they really have to kind of pay the piper here in February, because they just lost to USC. They have to play at UCLA on Tuesday night. And then Purdue is now further getting a little bit of a break potentially in the schedule, because if they'd had to play Iowa a week ago, they still have Owen Freeman, who is like a guy who can get double-doubles frequently and would have been a huge factor in Tuesday's game. And now he's done for the year, season-ending finger injury, and they don't have to play him at all. Like, it's just little things like that can sometimes make the difference. When you're talking about a half game difference, a 1 game difference in the standings, those things start to become massive.
Yeah, and the way Purdue has rebounded at times this year, or lack of rebounding, I think that's what the biggest advantages here to Freeman being out against Purdue is. That's 8 to 12 boards he probably are up for grabs now that he probably gets. So that can be huge in second chance points. I think that when you look at these two teams and the directions that they've been going recently, it's definitely, even if Freeman was playing, favorable to Purdue, but now even more so, where you're facing a team that's not very good defensively and now has lost one of its defensive linchpins and Owen Freeman.
And I think you brought up about Indiana. I felt about Indiana the same way I felt about Ohio State to some extent, which was it's really dangerous playing conference teams that are underachieving. I felt like that, go back to like the 2018 football Purdue upset over Ohio State. That was an underachieving Purdue team. And the Iowa team that beat Ohio State the year before was an underachieving team. And you look at the talent that they had on the field. They just weren't winning as many games as they should, and that's what helped fuel those upsets, was that it was a team kind of rising to the occasion. And I think you've seen that in basketball now 2 years in a row with Ohio State, a team that was clearly better than what its record was showing. That's why they fired Chris Holtmann midway through last year, because that team had all this talent that they just weren't utilizing. And in this 2 years in a row where that underachieving talent has kind of risen to the occasion against Purdue. And I think when you're a team like Purdue, you're probably even some ways more susceptible to that, because that's finally a team that maybe might feel like tense on any given night. Now you're going into games where you're clearly the underdog, like we've got nothing to lose. I think that opens a door for some of those sorts of upsets. So I was definitely on alert for that potentially being a case against Indiana, maybe less so because they had just lost to Ohio State, and that maybe wakes the team up a little bit. But I'm not as on alert for that going to Iowa, because even though Iowa's going to do some things that cause them problems, they will get out and pressure you. And I think Purdue hasn't seen that in a real way, like the 3/4 court trap and stuff that they do. Like I was there for the Rick Mount game several years ago where Purdue was up by a bunch and Iowa comes out, presses them, comes back and wins the game. Like, I wasn't there for an actual Rick Mount game. I meant the Rick Mount memorial game or honoring game.
Right here in the 60s.
I was not, no. But I could see them coming out and trying to do some of those things. And Purdue has to probably still keep answering that it can solve each of those situations as they come along. But again, another reason why I think playing Iowa in the first week of February is better than if they had played them in December in one of those first 2 games, because that team, guys like CJ Cox, Jakari Harris, I think we're probably less ready to face a team like Iowa than they will be on Tuesday night.
Yeah, and 2 years ago, and I referenced this before, Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith, when they started team full court press as freshmen, it was turnover city quite a bit, because you don't see that kind of pressure, even though those are the guys in their high school teams in AAU, probably high school if we're talking about defense and full court press and things of that sort. It's different when you're the best player on the floor and you can break it with ease. When you see it at this level and the way that teams have perfected it, like Iowa has to a degree, there's nothing that can really prepare you for it, even if you run it against practice players in Mackey Arena the day before. And you're right. Now, I think the development of CJ Cox and Jakari Harris and the comfortability, they're able to, you can skip the ball over to them and they can help you break a press, just bringing the ball up the court.
So let's recap the rankings, or the standings, I should say, real quick. Michigan State's still in first place, 9-1 after losing to USC. They've played one fewer game than Purdue has. It's one of the other ways why their schedule was easier before and is going to get tougher going forward. Purdue 9-2, so they're a half game back with one more loss. And then Michigan at 8-2 would be a half game back of Purdue, one less win. And then you've got Wisconsin, Maryland, and UCLA all at 7-4. And they would really have to come along and get some help. I think this is probably a 3-team race for the championship. If you look back 2 years, Purdue was going into its first game of February. It's not necessarily February 1st, although I think maybe they did play on February 1st that year. 22-1, 21-1, and 10-1 in the league. That already gave them a 3-game lead over Illinois and Northwestern. Like, they had already, kind of emphatically, as you remember, taken control of the league. Right. Last year at this time, though, it was a little bit more precarious. They were only up a half game on Wisconsin. Wisconsin did play on February 1st and lost. So that put them a half game up. It's kind of like opposite of the Michigan State thing this year. And then their first game of February was in Madison. And going up to Madison and winning that game put them a game and a half up on Wisconsin, kind of pushed them then towards, because they already had 2 losses. They took one more, but it pushed them towards winning that championship. And this is a month where they just had this nice home stretch. You got Ohio State at home, Indiana at home, Nebraska at home. It just feels like they've been home a lot here recently. But now, like almost every week, you're going to be dealing with some kind of a road test. And the Iowa one might have just gotten a little bit easier, but they've still got to go to Michigan State this month. They've got to go to Michigan this month. Like massive games are still to be won in other arenas. Indiana is always a tough place to play for this rivalry. I mean, the massive road games are coming, and I feel like it's going to be the test of whether this improvement that we think we have seen in the key areas of taking care of the ball and defending, do they keep traveling all of February? Doesn't mean they have to win all of those games, but do they travel enough that you are able to win some pivotal games in this month on the road?
Yeah, and Purdue is going to lose again at some point, whether that's tomorrow, whether that's Friday against the USC team that, as you mentioned, is coming along now. It's going to happen. But I think if Purdue wants to win a Big Ten championship, and it does, if Purdue is going to win a Big Ten championship, you have to hold steady on your home court going here on out. You stub your toe against Ohio State. Obviously, the road loss to Penn State early in the year looks like a bad loss now, but Purdue has done a great job, namely these last 2 years, of responding when something doesn't go its way. Last year, it was at Northwestern early in the Big Ten season. And I just think that experience, we talk about the freshmen and how far along they've come. And I wrote this after the IU game. Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman-Renn, even to a degree, Cam Heide, Miles Colvin, some of these guys coming off the bench have been in these situations so much now that they are not fazed by any scenario, any situation that you throw at them, because they've been in championship mode basically for 2 seasons. So that, and on top of that, just all the extra practices you get going through a Final Four run, things like that, those things carry over. And why a team that, looked like it was dead in the water against Indiana as recently as 4 days ago is able to come back and win that game.
And it's an old cliche in sports about you got to learn how to win, but this is kind of what you're talking about. That in part of learning how to win is, let's say you're a freshman, you're thrown to the wolves a little bit and right into the starting lineup, and a lot is expected of you, of a team that has big team-wide expectations, and you struggle at times. There's times where it looks like maybe you don't belong out there, or that you're in over your head. Probably not so much by the end of that season, but still, in those tougher games, and yet you still win a Big Ten championship. You still persevere through that and win a Big Ten championship. And I think that it comes around this year and they can sit back and look and say, well, we've got a great record and we've gotten a lot better in 3 years, and we get to play these teams head to head and we think we can beat them. Why would there be any panic? And that mindset has been pretty apparent going back to the preseason before they played any games. But it was definitely at that point where they were 8-4 this year and had lost some games to some really good teams. And the way that they were kind of disappointed, but taking that in stride. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we came in today to do interviews, and right away, we're not really, even before we start asking questions, because I asked a few about kind of this portion of the season and chasing a championship and those sorts of things. But even before that, especially with CJ Cox came in today, and the first 2 questions he got, I don't think were anything to do with that, but he brings up Big Ten championship, in the first 2 answers he gives. And it's very apparent that it's a constant conversation that's going on with this program right now. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Michigan State lost the other day and they all come in today and are it kind of, I think, reinforces okay, well, they're down a notch. Now it's only 1 game we have to make up, not 2. And we've got 1 game up on them as far as how many we've played. We're in good shape here.
Yeah. And so a lot of times when people are in the situation and you're a team that hasn't done this before, they'll tell you, and it's probably not truthful, but they'll say, 1 game at a time, we're not even paying attention to the standings, whatever it might be. And Fletcher, the lawyer, today made it very much public knowledge that we are cognizant that we are in the thick of this race and we want to win this title. He said, I'm watching college basketball. I watched Michigan State lose and was like, hey, that benefits us. So Purdue is well aware of what's going on, and that, in some ways it's kind of chasing versus being the team that was chased in recent years. but also as it knows it is in a situation, a position where it, like you said, is Purdue's title to lose, because you do have to go to Michigan State. And right now, if you win out, you're going to win the Big Ten championship.
That was refreshing to me too, to hear him admit that. And I talked to Cam Heide off the side later and kind of asked him the same question. I'm like, listen, it's human nature. Like, you're gonna really tell me you're not watching the standings to see who has won, even if you don't have a chance to watch the game between your own games and practice and schedule or school and all those things. Like, you're at least keeping an eye on what's going on there. And it probably helps right now that there's only 2 teams that they have to pay attention to, and they're 2 teams that they still have games coming up against. 2 primary teams. Maybe that changes, but it really does look like a 3-team race right now for the championship. So we thought a good topic of conversation for today would be, outside of those top 3, outside of Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman, Wren, who is the most, what word do we want to use? Important, essential, crucial? Who is the most crucial, essential, important player on this team besides the top 3 for Purdue to end up winning a Big Ten championship this year? And it was your idea that you threw out there, so I'll let you go first. Who comes to mind for you as like the key 4th person for whether Purdue wins this Big Ten championship or not?
And when I was thinking of this idea, everybody talks about those 3 juniors, and clearly for good reason. They are the best 3 players on the team, or 3 leaders of this team. And then there's this 9-man rotation. So there's 6 guys that on any given night, it seems to be this guy stepping up, that guy stepping up. I think in these post-game press conferences, we get 3 players, and it's probably been any one of those other 6 who were in the rotation multiple times throughout the course of the season. And at the time, I was writing something on Cam Heide and how his role was not what he expected it to be going into this season because of Jacobson's injury. And then just he was thrust into the starting lineup, then he lost that starting job, and now has, a couple games recently been big off the bench helping this team win tough games against Indiana, a big game at Oregon at the time. And I was like, is Cam Heide the most important piece here? And I think the most reasonable answer here, because of their role currently, is CJ Cox. And while people remember what he did against Alabama and the offensive burst that he's giving Purdue at times, I think it's because he seems to get timely rebounds, even though he's not a very big guy. A big one was an offensive rebound at the end of the first half against Indiana that led to Jakari Harris making a shot in the last second there that kind of gives Purdue some momentum going into the locker room. He does a lot of little things like that, but mostly his defense, picking up point guards full court, and he seems to just get these steals every game where he just swipes the ball away and it leads to an easy transition bucket in a moment in the game early on where it feels like it's kind of pivotal. You're trying to either quiet a road crowd or get your home crowd excited, and he's making these plays that kind of one way or the other, wherever you're playing at, have done that. So my answer would be CJ Cox for that reason, because he's a starter and can give you that infusion kind of from the tip.
That was actually going to be my answer, so I'll change my answer. But I think you're right that he is, to me, the most obvious answer, partially because we have already seen him to win a championship now. Purdue's going to have to win crucial games against those other really good teams. And we have now seen CJ Cox as a true freshman and not even like an especially hyped one at that, come in and look very much ready for the moment. Only a few games in against Alabama, right? Coming in and just like rising to the occasion and pumping in those threes against Alabama. We saw him come in. Michigan's coming here for a huge game, and Purdue just runs him out of the gym. And what's the first thing Dusty May's talking about when he comes in at the press conference is the ball pressure that CJ Cox was applying out there. And that's just 2 examples, but moments where he stepped up in games that were massive for what Purdue wanted to do and be this season, and he rose to the moment. Like a true freshman, it's not going to happen on a nightly basis, but it doesn't really happen on a nightly basis for hardly anybody, even the best players on this team.
That's why we have this topic right now.
Right. So I agree that the thing that I think sets him apart is, we, at the beginning of this season, I thought maybe there was going to be this differential between where, okay, Jakari Harris is the one that's more ready to defend at this level, and CJ Cox being the one who's more ready to shoot/score at this level, or more confident in each of those things. And Cox, I think, has proven himself to be every bit as ready defensively as Harris is. and he can score. Like Jakari tries to help from an offensive standpoint, and I think long term he's going to get there. But CJ is more ready right now to put points on the board for this team, and this team will occasionally, as we've talked about, need that fourth score. It could be that somebody's in foul trouble. It could be, right now teams are really trying to restrict how many threes this team shoots, how much they're letting Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer have attempts at three-pointers, but that's going to open something for someone else. And of the other people that could be right now, they're all capable. I mean, we've seen Miles Colvin shoot 40-some% last year. Cam Heide shoots threes. Jakari Harris, that's not his strength right now. I think in long-term, again, it could be. He has recently, though. It is starting to come around for him. But which of that group has been really the most consistent? I would say it's CJ Cox. And the more you can have him on the floor to be ready when that opens up, could be the crucial one or two baskets that you get at Michigan State, at Michigan. And those are like one possession games potentially. And you want that shot maker on the floor, especially if you're not sacrificing anything defensively.
Yeah. And one thing that I didn't even think of this, and kudos to who asked the question. I can't remember who did it. Ask Matt Painter. He said, is the fact that Jakari Harris and CJ Cox are playing 20 to 25 minutes a night and kind of splitting minutes.
It was Casey.
Yeah. Casey from Rivals. Is that helping with the freshman wall? We saw a couple years ago when Fletcher Lawyer just fell off planet Earth about this time of the season because he was playing 30 minutes a night and a full-time starter. And people were asking him at the time, like, are your legs tired? What's happened? You suddenly can't make shots, things like that. And he deflected, as he should. But there was clearly something wrong. And when you play a high school season that's 20 games, and then you play a college season, which is 35 to 40 games, there becomes a point where it's just, a lot more on your body and probably some time to adjust. And I thought that was a very good question because these guys haven't had the wear and tear on their body that you typically would if you're a starting freshman guard for a Big Ten team, because you're able to swap those two out and do some different things with, I think Matt Painter's probably best coaching job out of this team this year has been how he has split the minutes, although Braden Smith is basically Iron Man. He's going to play every minute for the rest of the season that is a competitive minute where he's not in foul trouble. But for the rest of it, done a very good job of divvying up those minutes between kind of like the 9 or the 6 guys beyond the big 3 that we're talking about here.
And it's tough, and it there's so much of variance there. I was asked on a radio show last week. Someone asked a question that was sort of like slanted towards the inconsistency of the guys behind the top 3. And I was like, well, I think it's a little bit eye of the beholder, because on the one hand, is it inconsistent, which it's a situation where it asks for inconsistency because the minutes are inconsistent. So the production would be inconsistent. I don't think that's just coach speak when Matt Painter talks about that. I think you can probably watch across basketball, and that's true. If you don't know how much you're going to play, it's harder to get in a rhythm, and it can fluctuate on any given night. But I look at it from the other perspective, which is someone keeps stepping up almost every night, like from that group. Like as you were saying before, like when we're thinking about who we're going to request for interviews after a game, and it's always 3, like sometimes it's just, well, we'll just take the big 3, especially from losses. We tend to like pick the main
veterans. 3. They know the right things to say, and you gotta get insightful answers when you ask them questions.
And those are some nights also the games where for whatever reason that fourth element wasn't there or whatever. But a lot of times it's like which guy was the one who kind of rose to the occasion night. And some nights it's Jakari, some nights it's been Miles Colvin, it's been CJ Cox, it's been Cam Heide. It's kind of spread across the team. So Caleb first. So definitely had his moment there for a little ways. So that kind of leads me into my answer, which was going to be Caleb first, because this team has to defend.
We got McCarty sneaking in here behind us. So.
Sorry about that. This team has to defend and it has to rebound, or it's not going to win a Big Ten championship. And this team has defended and rebounded better since Caleb first became a starter. And he has to do some of those things better than he did, frankly, against Indiana. If you're going to be kind of a 0 offensively or have very limited, certainly scoring input offensively, then your defense and rebounding really need to kind of be on point. And he did not handle that situation very well, I didn't think, against Ballo underneath against Indiana. And hopefully that's like a learning moment for him. Although he's a senior, you're kind of running out of time to have learning moments. But I almost think that reinforced, because what did that show you? was that when he didn't like kind of rise to the occasion and win that matchup, or at least like kind of neutralize that matchup, that's when Indiana kept surging. That's when Indiana came back and had a chance to win that game, and maybe should have won that game if not for the way things go at the end of that game. They kind of rolled and produced favor, and they made big plays too. So he stands out to me as like a guy that if he can't, sustain what we've seen from him since the start of end of December, start of January, and be not just starting, but playing like a starter, especially as it comes to, helping defend the post, being disruptive, getting his hand in passing lanes. He's created a lot of turnovers in this middle like third of the season, but then also like really having to help this team rebound. Then I think that is going to be, it could be the thing that costs Purdue on one of those one possession nights against the other teams that they're head to head with for this championship. And it could be, if you lose the Big Ten by one game, that could be how that happens.
Yeah. You have to be a senior basically. And I know his minutes were very limited as a junior, but he was a starter as a freshman part of the year. He's a starter part of the year as a sophomore. And now he's a guy who's got to be a leader of this team, whether it's by, being vocal or more so in his case, probably by what he does on the court. And you're right. Like the steals numbers that he got for a stretch were just baffling to me, because I think his career high at one point was 2 steals, and he just started poking his hand in the lane and knocking balls away. Even the steals he wasn't credited for, he had a hand in some of those. And he's
had at least one steal in 8 straight games.
Right.
And for a while there, it was just like 1-1-1, then 4-1-1, 2-3. He had 3 against Indiana. So even though a game where I think he would tell you he didn't play all that well, still 3 steals out of the 19 turnovers that Purdue created that night.
Yeah. He just, being 6'10" and being able to move a little bit, he gives you something that Trey Kaufman doesn't. And between those two and then Heidi, you're getting 3 really different players who can kind of defend in that low block, and the way Purdue's been helping recently give you opportunities to get steals and things of that sort. But I think, though the offensive numbers haven't been there for Caleb Furst, I think he's a guy that can give you kind of a surge, because at some point there's going to be a team that says, we're going to double Trey Coffin-Wren and not let him get to his, spin moves or whatever it is, or let him go to work one-on-one in the paint, which is last year when Trey Coffin-Wren had big games, because teams did that to Zach Edey. I think that's when Caleb Furst has to step up and take advantage of an opportunity and go give you 10 or 12 points because teams just aren't paying attention to him.
Purdue's not going to create offensive opportunities for Caleb Furst. That's not why he is on the floor. I just think he's someone that if he can also capitalize a little bit better on the ones he gets, that's finishing around the rim and that's shooting better free throws. He's not really an asset at the free throw line right now, and everybody has seen that at times there are exceptions to this. At Washington, he had a fantastic game when he needed to step up and play a big role, and was one of the reasons they were able to win that game rather than take what would be a fairly embarrassing loss at this stage on the road there. And so we've seen him have the potential to step up and do that. I think for him, it's just maintaining the confidence every night and just being consistent with it. And again, in these games that are going to end up being decided most likely by 1 or 2 possessions, that one bunny at the rim that goes down as far or doesn't come out, or like one free throw you make, or 1 or 2 free throws that you make over the course of taking 5 or 6 in a game can have a huge ripple effect. That's how tight this race could be. I mean, again, we're 3 teams decided by 1 game as we're heading into the final 9 or 10 games of the season, depending on who they are.
Yeah,
8 or 9 actually, 8 or 9 games this season.
And that's not to diminish, the other, I guess, would be 4 guys in the rotation that we didn't talk about today, because they're all going to have a point at this season where I think they make a big play. And you were kind of jokingly saying this a few games back, I think, while we were watching a game in our seats in Mackey Arena. Miles Colvin missed a 3, and everything looks like he's doing the right thing, but the shots just are hitting the back iron, or they're spinning off the rim and coming out. And you said, he's going to hit the game-winning 3 that sends him to the Sweet 16 or something like that. And he keeps shooting, and that's what you want guys who are, as you said, 40+% 3-point shooters a year ago to do, is to kind of shoot themselves out of a funk. I think there very much could be a game where Miles Colvin goes out and goes off and everything seems to be falling. I think Cam Heide has been very good, despite the numbers maybe saying that he hasn't been that good because he's done other things. He's gotten rebounds. He's defending a 4, which is, not his strong suit, but he's giving you minutes there as a guy who can do that. And then Jakari Harris, clearly, as we mentioned, he just had I think he was one of the most important reasons why Purdue beat Indiana, not just because of the block at the end of the game, but just because what he gave you the last minute of the first half and then pretty much the duration of the second half. All of these guys are capable of being very good in their roles on any given night, which when you talk about championship teams, that's what you have to have. You have to, you can't just rely on a 3-player team or couple key guys to carry you to a championship. You've got to have several guys who are capable of making a key play at some moment in a big game.
I think both Heide and Colvin have that potential to be like, boy, it's been a really rough year shooting the ball, and then they hit in some huge shot or have a game where they go 3 for 4 or whatever, and it just happened to be their night coming off the bench. They got extended minutes because Fletcher Loyer had foul trouble, and next thing you know, like they just get hot against the right team in the right matchup. Like they both have that potential. Would you rather they just shoot a steady 40% for the season? I guess, but like that's not really how numbers work in basketball, because some nights you don't even take a 3, or maybe you're 0 for 1 and you don't really get a chance to get in that rhythm, and another night you do. It's they're kind of at the whims of the schedule and the whims of how these matchups work out. But Tuesday night we will be in Iowa. Even though that's a diminished Iowa team, you can't take anything for granted at this point because you're chasing a championship. Purdue is the one thing that they aren't probably in position to do. Probably not. I mean, you can't take it off the table completely yet as far as chasing a number 1 seed for the NCAA tournament. If they were to win out going into the Big Ten tournament and be the Big Ten tournament number 1 seed, and then don't trip up before the selection show, although I don't know how much those really influence it, but if you're to win out, and that means you're getting a win at Michigan State, a win at Michigan, a win at Illinois, another home win against Wisconsin, another home win against UCLA. Like if you ran the table, then you're going to start to pile up the kind of resume that, depending on what happens to those teams that are more spoken of as surefire number 1s right now, or likely number 1s, then maybe you get in that conversation. It's probably more likely that they're playing for a 2 this year, but still a lot to play for this season down the back end. It's not just like you're in the tournament. We know they're in the tournament. So then it's just a matter of like, well, are we going to be a 4 seed or a 5 seed? Like, no, like there's like real things left to achieve for this team.
Yeah. And obviously Purdue, that's beyond Purdue's control. It can just go out and play out the duration of the regular season in the Big Ten tournament. And then you get the seed that you get. And sometimes it's fair and justified. Sometimes you feel like you get slighted. But Purdue wants to put itself in the best position possible to make another run through the NCAA tournament, which is what it's really all about, whether that's as a 3 seed, a 2 seed, a 1 seed, a 5 seed, which is probably not going to happen at this point with Purdue's resume. But I think that's the biggest thing now, is other than a Big Ten title, is how high can you put yourself on that seed line, and how high, even if you're a 3 seed, can you be the first 3 seed? A lot of things that just kind of give you an easier path through a postseason tournament.
Yeah, I think that's, right now they're like squarely on the 2-3 line. I was looking at bracket matrix. There's 91 brackets on there right now, and Purdue was a 2 or 3 on 87 of them. And there's 4 people that had them as a 4. But again, don't freak out by that, because like the difference between 3 and 4 is not a huge gap. It's like, are you 12th or 13th? Like it's that small sometimes. So, but they're in a good position because of who they have yet to play. Like on one hand, that seems like it's a tough way to end the season, and we pointed that out from the beginning. Although even some of those games, it was like we thought coming into the season, like, man, that's gonna be a tough like stretch to end the year, right? Like those last 5 games or whatever it was. Well, now it's like, okay, well, you got to play Rutgers at home. All right. Like you got to play at Indiana, but who knows what mindset Indiana is going to be in on February 23rd. I mean, this isn't the typical IU Purdue makeup, because IU is not a bunch of Indiana guys.
Right.
The way Purdue is very still Indiana centric. Indiana was a bunch of guys cobbled together from around the country.
There are a few, Anthony Leal and Trey Galloway.
Yeah,
but beyond that,
stuff, but
portal guys and
right. So yeah, I mean, those games I think we look at with a different perspective. I mean, Indiana was picked number 2 preseason in the Big Ten media poll. Right, Indiana was number 2 in that, and it is not out of the question that Indiana doesn't make the Big Ten tournament this year. So like, it's been a trying season down there, as I think Purdue fans are well aware.
And it's just, I think the biggest, because the talent's there. When you look at these players individually, you say, well, what a stacked roster, or, very good roster that Indiana put together. And then you look at the dysfunction, even Friday night in Mackey Arena, we saw Umar Ballo walk off the court without shaking hands and visibly frustrated at Miles Rice taking the potential game-winning shot there at the end. So, there clearly is frustration mounting. And when you have fans in Bloomington going to games and chanting to fire the coach and things like that, it's not going well, despite Indiana. When you look at its record and its resume, you think, not so bad. But some places, whether it's like Notre Dame football, Indiana basketball, whatever, there's this different level of expectation where that fan base remembers what it used to be and kind of wants to always hold on to that expectation, even when, those days are long gone.
Mike Woodson got a nice ovation when he was introduced at Mackey Arena the other night. I think that's what you want to hear.
People in West Lafayette want him to be the head coach next year. I assure you.
But Purdue has its own things to worry about. It's got its own things to pursue, including playing another game later this season at Indiana. And it's not like they had no issues with Indiana. They're going to have to be better the second time when they have that game on the road. So we're going to sign off there. We're going to have more football talk. So basically the way this week works, we haven't talked football in a while. Tuesday we'll be in Iowa City. Then next morning we're going to scoot back to West Lafayette as quickly as we can, because 2 p.m. Wednesday, Purdue is having its National Signing Day, or first day of the late period extravaganza, press conference, whatever, with Barry Odom. I don't know if it's going to be anybody besides Barry. I think it might just be Barry Odom that we're getting on Wednesday. But to talk about that class, which is essentially going to be talking about all the transfers that are coming in, this huge transfer portal haul that they landed and had to get to replace the transfer portal exits that were heading out. So that roster is taking shape, and we're going to start parsing that out a little bit. And then before you know it, like, we're a month away from the start of spring football. So we get to actually see what this team starts to look like. That's still going to be very, like, foundational time more than it is like being able to make sweeping judgments about this team. But they're in the process of like doing their winter workouts. And then really a week from now, I was told, we don't have an exact date yet, but first week of March, that's going to open up sometime mid-April, the spring, whatever they do. Hopefully we get to see that and give us a better indication of where that team is at going into the fall. But we'll have a lot more to say about football on Saturday. For Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. That was Boilers Extra.